fever, one of the most rampant disease we see every year, and this is the most common time that we see the dengue fever normally. So, dengue fever is a febrile illness caused by infection with one of four dengue virus transmitted by the mosquito Aedes aegypti or Aedes albopictus mosquitoes during the blood meal, the taking of the blood meal. So the infection is mainly asymptomatic or present with broad range of clinical manifestations. So it could be a febrile illness, or it could be as a life-threatening shock syndrome also. So not all the people who are infected by dengue virus will be showing all the symptoms and signs. Few can be asymptomatic also, but few can present with mild illness to life-threatening shock syndrome. So it is under the family flavivirus. So there are four types of virus: dengue virus 1, 2, 3, 4. So so according to the WHO classification, the dengue fever has been infection has been divided into classified into three. So they are dengue fever, dengue hemorrhagic fever, and dengue shock syndrome. So the classification according to the WHO, the symptomatic dengue virus infection has been divided into dengue fever, dengue hemorrhagic fever, and dengue shock syndrome. So, how does the WHO classify them? So, there is a dengue without the warning signs, and there is a dengue fever with warning signs. So, only a presumptive diagnosis of dengue infection is to be made. It's made on the history. So, with the endemic fever and the plus dengue, these are the with dengue fever without the warning signs. That is, they should be having two or more of the following: nausea or vomiting, the rash, the leukopenia, positive tourniquet test, and the headache, eye pain, muscle pain, or joint pain. And when the dengue has the following things, following symptoms, and following signs, and it's a dengue with warning signs, that is abdominal pain or tenderness, persistent vomiting, clinical fluid accumulation, that is fluid accumulated in peritoneum ascites or pleural effusion, the mucosal bleeding, the restlessness, hepatomegaly, that is more than 2 centimeters, and increase in the hematocrit concurrent with rapid platelet decrease. Important point: increase in the hematocrit along with the rapid platelet decrease is one of the very important warning sign along with this remaining few signs. So how is severe dengue? The severe dengue, you will be seeing at least one of the following, that is severe plasma leakage that leads to shock or fluid accumulation with respiratory distress, and either severe bleeding or severe organ involvement. That is, when there is hepatic involvement, you will be seeing aspartate or aminotransferase, alanine aminotransferase being more than 1000 units per liter, or impaired consciousness and other organ failures like renal failure and all. So there are three: dengue without warning signs, which has mild following, that is many two of the following, that is nausea, vomiting, rash, leukopenia, positive tourniquet test and all. And whereas there is dengue with warning signs with following, and important of that is increase in hematocrit with rapid platelet decrease, and there is a severe dengue in which you have severe plasma leakage leading to shock or severe bleeding or other major organ involvement. So how does the pathogenesis occur? The pathogenesis, dengue virus, rhesus monkey model, the only animal model is available. Though in the monkey there exists viremia, there is no pathological process. This has led to existence of substantial gaps in understanding the pathology of dengue fever. So the dengue virus, it comes under the flavivirus, under the family Flaviviridae. It is a small enveloped virus which is a single-stranded RNA with positive polarity. It's a flavivirus of family Flaviviridae with a single-stranded RNA and positive polarity. So how does the replication of this occur? So the replication, viral replication, first the virus is attached to the cell surface, and it is by viral envelope E glycoprotein binding. So by this it attaches to the cell surface receptors such as heparin sulfate and lectins. Once it is attached, it is enters into the cytoplasm. So the cytoplasm, the fusion of viral and cell membranes is acidified endocytic vesicles. This leads to the entry into the cytoplasm. And then the translation of viral proteins. There is a direct translation of the viral RNA into single polyprotein. So once it attaches, it goes into the cytoplasm and then it is translated. Then the replication of the viral genome occurs. So this polyprotein which is formed, it is cleaved into 3 structural and 7 non-structural proteins. That is with functional virus encoded as non-structural protein NS3. And there is a non-structural protein NS5 that is RNA dependent RNA polymerase which assembles the viral and host proteins to form the replication complex. It serves as negative stranded RNA which in turn serves as template for the production of viral genomic RNA. So NS5 is what you have to remember. It's an RNA dependent RNA polymerase which forms the new strands. Once the polyprotein is formed after entering into the cytoplasm, it is cleaved with the help of the functional virus, non-structural protein NS3, and with the help of NS5, the new viral strands are being formed. And these are capsulated, and then there is a release from the cell. You can see once it enters, here you can see NS5, NS3. There is synthesis and non-structural proteins. You can see the step 1, the absorption and the receptor binding, fusion, uncoating, non-structural proteins being formed, the packaging, and then budding, and then being released out. So these are step 1, 2, 3, 4. The 5, this is the translation step. The 6th step, and the synthesis and assembly. Then there is the packaging. Then there is budding, and then there is a release. So how does the course of the event infection occurs? So there are early events and late events. In the first 24 hours, the virus can be isolated only from the site of the injection in the skin. Both Langerhans cells and dermal fibroblasts have been proposed to be target cells, though major target cell type has not been identified. But after 24 hours, the virus can be detected only in the regional lymph nodes. So within 24 hours, if you are searching for the virus, then it can be isolated from the site of injection in the skin. But after 24 hours, the virus can be detected only in the lymph nodes. So when is the viremia observed? So after the mosquito bite occurs and the virus enters and all, the viremia, the infection, the secondary effects of the infection and the increase of the virus occurs between 2 to 6 days after the injection and usually lasts for 3 to 6 days. Though in humans it has been observed that viremia starts a day later than the monkey, however the duration is the same. And the distribution of the virus, no specific major target cell has been identified, but the most studies show that in the peripheral blood, mononuclear cells and the B cells are being affected. And based on antigen staining, most often dengue virus was isolated from liver tissue and macrophages of the skin. Though a predominant cell type, target cell type, has not been observed, like the CD4 count in the HIV virus, and as such, this is not targeting any cell type, major cell type specifically, but it can be found to be affecting mononuclear cells and B cells and can be found in liver tissue, in the macrophages of the skin. And the primary response, in vivo response of there's interferon response and antibody response. So the interferon response is the primary response of dengue virus infection is observed in the help of production of interferons, that is interferon alpha has been observed in the children. However, the dengue viral proteins are able to inhibit both production of interferons and their antiviral function in infected cells. So you can see here, there is production of interferon alpha, that is elevated alpha has been children. But once these viral proteins are also able to inhibit this production of interferons, which leads to their antiviral function in the infected cells to be decreased. And there is an antibody response. The antibody response is directed at serotype specific dermatins. That is E protein, precursor membrane, and NS1. So, what are the E protein targeted antibody response? Antibodies to them mediate neutralization via direct complement mediated lysis or antibody dependent cellular cytotoxicity of dengue virus, or the virus attachment to the cell receptor is blocked. So, whenever the antibodies are produced against the E protein, there is an direct complement mediated lysis or antibody dependent cellular cytotoxicity of the dengue virus, or there is a blockage of the virus attachment to the cell receptors. This is how these antibodies against the E protein work. And when there is a precursor membrane antibodies, specific antibodies only bind to the virions that not have fully matured. And there is NS1 antibody which is not found in the virion, and the NS1 specific antibodies are therefore capable of neutralizing the virus infection, but can also directly complement mediated lysis of the infected cells can also occur. So I'll come again. There is an E protein antibody response, precursor membrane antibody response, and NS1 antibody response, of which precursor membrane, pre-membrane, specific antibodies only bind to the virions that are not fully matured. Whereas the E protein, there is a complement mediated lysis, cytotoxic lysis, and block of the virus attachment to the cell receptors. And there is one NS1, just a minute, and there is NS1 which is not found in the virion. This NS1 has specific antibodies, are therefore incapable of neutralization of virus infection, but can direct complement mediated lysis of the infected cells. Because though they directly cannot kill the virus, neutralization of virus, they can direct complement mediated lysis of the infected cells, that is virus infected cells. Now the viral clearance and the neutralization. The basis of neutralization of virus by antibodies not well understood. And this neutralization clearly requires a threshold level of antibodies. When the concentration of antibodies is below this threshold, the uptake of antibody bound virus by the cells that expresses immunoglobulin receptors is paradoxically increased, and the process termed antibody dependent enhancement of the infection. So the neutralization of the virus, they required a threshold level of antibodies. But when this is low, then the antibodies are lower than this threshold, the uptake of antibody bound virus by the cells that express immunoglobulin receptors is paradoxically increased. So when the antibodies threshold is very low, this antibody bound virus that express immunoglobulin in the receptors is paradoxically increased. Now, this process is termed as antibody dependent enhancement of the infection. Because of the decreased antibodies threshold, there is an increased uptake of the antibody bound virus by the cells. So, it is in per se leading to increase of the infection. So, this is termed as antibody dependent enhancement of the infection. And the T lymphocyte response to dengue virus infection also includes both serotype specific and serotype cross reactive responses. That is, dengue virus specific CD plus 4 and CD8 plus T cells can lyse dengue virus infected cells in vitro and produce cytokines such as interferon gamma, human necrosis factor alpha, and lymphotoxin. So, this is an important point, the antibody dependent and enhancement of infection. So there is something called primary versus secondary infection. So what is primary infection and what is secondary infection? The primary infection is the first infection with any one of the four dengue virus serotypes, and it ends with a long lasting immunity to the infected serotype and transient immunity to other three. So the primary infection is the first infection with any of the four dengue virus serotypes, and there is a long lasting immunity to the infected serotype and a transient immunity to other three. And whereas the secondary infection is a successive infection with one of the three remaining serotypes, the other than the one which has been affected primarily. The other three, any one of the other three, when the patient is affected again, that is a successive infection with one of the three remaining serotypes, that is secondary infection. And this leads to higher viral RNA levels in CD+4 monocyte, 14 monocytes among dengue fever patients compared to the primary infections. And there is very low concentration of antibodies to the virus serotype, causing secondary infection are present before the exposure to the virus. As a result, antibody dependent enhancement of infection could occur early. As we were speaking, the decreased amount of the antibodies can lead to increased uptake of antibody bound virus by the cell. So as a antibody dependent enhancement of infection can occur early. The concentration of the dengue virus specific antibodies increase earlier, reach higher peak titers, and have a lower IgM to IgG ratio and suggestive of anamnestic response. So, though all of these, a successive infection with one of the three remaining serotypes is what we call secondary infection, and they have very low concentration of antibodies, leading to an antibody-dependent enhancement of the infections. So, the two main points of secondary infection. And another primary infection is the first infection with any of the four dengue virus serotypes and ends with long-lasting immunity to the infected serotype and transient immunity to the other three. So, what are the factors which include the dengue severity? So, they are viral factors, prior dengue exposure, age, nutritional status are the four factors which lead to influencing the dengue severity. So, the viral factors are several prospective studies have indicated that risk is highest when dengue virus type 2 is developing. So, whenever there is infected with dengue virus type 2, they have very high chances of developing severe dengue. The viral, there are four types. Of the second type has more chance of severe dengue. Or when there is a prior dengue exposure, there is a high chance of severe dengue than compared to the primary infection. And the age, the risk of dengue hemorrhagic fever declines with age, especially after 11 years. So this is an important point. As the age increases, the dengue hemorrhagic fever, uh, the risk decreases with age, especially after 11 years. And infants, those in endemic areas, particularly those between 6 and 12 months of age, are more affected. The nutritional status, some studies have reported that dengue hemorrhagic fever and dengue shock syndrome are less common in malnourished children than in well-nourished children, and this has been taken to reflect the role of immune response in disease pathogenesis. As you can see here, it is less common in malnourished children than in well-nourished children, the dengue hemorrhagic fever and dengue shock syndrome. So the factors which influence are viral factors, prior dengue exposure, that is viral factor type 2 is has more severity. The prior dengue exposure, that is secondary infection, has more chances. The age, as the age increases, the dengue hemorrhagic fever chances decreases, and the nutritional status, the malnourished children have less chances of dengue hemorrhagic fever and shock syndrome. The pathophysiology of disease manifestation. So there is something called capillary leak syndrome. The enhanced capillary permeability appears due to endothelial cell dysfunction. Normally, when there is an injury to the vessel wall or endothelial, we will be seeing the capillary leak. But here, there is an enhanced capillary permeability due to endothelial cell dysfunction, and the multiple mediators are likely to be involved. So, what are the mediators that can lead to this? Is tumor necrosis factor alpha, interferon gamma, and the interleukins like IL-2, IL-8, and the vascular endothelial growth factors and the complement. The sources of these cytokines have been proposed to include virus-infected monocytes, dendritic cells, mast cells, activated platelets, dengue virus-specific CD8 and CD4 lymphocytes. So the important point here is it's not due to the injury of the endothelial cell, but due to the dysfunction of the endothelial cell that leads to the increased capillary permeability, leading to capillary leak syndrome. So the blood and bone marrow. In the blood and bone marrow, you will be seeing leukopenia, the virus which leads to decreased WBC leukopenia. There is a thrombocytopenia, and hemorrhagic diastasis are the typical hematological findings in the dengue virus infections. In vitro studies have shown that dengue virus infects human bone marrow stromal cells and hematopoietic progenitor cells and inhibits progenitor cell growth. And some degree of thrombocytopenia is common in both dengue fever and dengue hemorrhagic fever. And bone marrow suppression may play a role, but platelet destruction is probably more important. So the take-home points is there is presence of leukopenia, thrombocytopenia, and hemorrhagic diastasis are the typical hematological findings you will be seeing in the dengue virus infections. And the absorption of dengue virus virions or virus antibody immune complexes to the platelet surface with subsequent activation of complement are thought to be responsible for platelet destruction. As we were speaking here, the platelet destruction is probably the most important point here, and that occurs due to either directly due to the dengue virions or the virus antibody immune complexes. They then go and attach to the platelet surface, which leads to activation of the complement system and the destruction of the platelets. And the manifestations of the hemorrhagic diastasis in dengue virus infection range from a positive tourniquetus to a life-threatening hemorrhage, and the cause may be molecular mimicry between the dengue viral proteins and the coagulation factors. The molecular mimicry means it shows similar. The body thinks these dengue viral proteins and the coagulation factors are same, so the action against the dengue viral proteins can be seen on the coagulation factors, leading to decreased coagulation factors and increased hemorrhage. There could be autoimmunity. The immune cells of our body, as they should act on the dengue viral proteins, they go and act on the coagulation factors due to the molecular mimicry. That is the similar structure and similar molecules. So that leads to decreased coagulation factors, decreased platelets, and increased chance of hemorrhage. And the causes of bleeding in dengue. So there is abnormal coagulogram, there is thrombocytopenia, platelet dysfunction, prothrombin complex deficiency, that is due to in liver involvement, endothelial injury, as they were saying previously, but the endothelial dysfunction as now, and there is de-ice prolonged epitp, increased levels of fibrinogen degradation product, increased level of D-dimer, consumptive coagulopathy, and sequestration of platelets. So of this, the important points are thrombocytopenia and platelet dysfunction, and the consumptive coagulopathy and the sequestration of the platelets. These are the points that you should be remembering, causes of bleeding in the dengue. So how does this affect liver and the other systems? In liver, when the dengue virus is infected, there is elevation of serum aminotransferases that are usually mild or common in dengue virus infection. The typical pathological findings in liver for fatal case of dengue include hepatocellular necrosis and councilman bodies with relatively little inflammatory cell infiltration. So the typical findings is what they will be asking. That is hepatocellular necrosis and the councilman bodies with relatively little inflammatory cell infiltration. And the relatively frequent isolation of dengue virus from liver cells of fatal cases suggests that liver injury is directly mediated by dengue virus infection of hepatocytes and Kupffer cells. As we were speaking previously, you can isolate the dengue virus from the liver tissues, and when you see that in the fatal cases, that is due to that suggests that the liver injury is due to infection of hepatocytes in the Kupffer cells, and the dengue virus has shown to infect and induce apoptosis in a human hepatoma cell in vitro. So the important points are it includes hepatocellular necrosis and councilman bodies with relatively little inflammatory cell infiltration. This is a typical pathological finding in a dengue case. So to summarize the pathophysiology of the dengue fever, there is production of antibodies, presence of enhancing antibodies, and there is an antigen antibody reaction with complement activation. So this deposition in the vessels and various tissues and platelets that leads to destruction and the clinical manifestations of the coagulopathy. And on the other side, there is activation of T cells, production of various chemical mediators, increased vascular permeability that leads to dengue hemorrhagic fever, and the clinical manifestations of vasculopathy, that is capillary leakage. So there is due to production of antibodies and enhancing antibodies that leads to complement activation due to antigen antibody reaction and the after effects. And there's activation of T cells and production of chemical mediators and their after effects. And all this leads to hypotension and shock, the pleural effusion, ascites, bleeding, and the other organ involvements and the secondary effects of this organ involvements. So this is the, to summarize, if you want to summarize the pathophysiology of the dengue fever, I'll just speak again. The production of antibodies and the presence of enhancing of antibodies. This leads to antigen antibody reaction with complement activation. And this leads to, these are the deposited in the vessels, various tissues and platelets. And this leads to clinical manifestations of coagulopathy. And there is an activation of T cells, production of various chemical mediators, increased vascular permeability, clinical manifestations of vasculopathy, and this leads to hypotension, pleural effusion, ascites, bleeding, and the organ involvement. So the clinical features. So in the clinical features, we will be saying three phases. That is very important: febrile phase, critical phase, and there is a recovery phase. So here you can see the day one, the affected temperature being increased and then decreased slowly and again then increased. So is initially you'll be seeing dehydration, and once the organ impairment starts, you'll be seeing shock and bleeding, and then the reabsorption fluid overload situation. In the laboratory changes, this is the potential clinical issues. In the laboratory changes, the hematocrit will be normal, and once the shock or the bleeding see, you will be seeing the hematocrit being raised, and then be completely normal. And the laboratory changes of the platelets would be normal at first, decreased very much, and slowly increasing. So that is how you'll be seeing, and the IgM and IgG being raised slowly from the point of the infection. So as we are speaking, there are three phases: febrile phase, critical phase, and the recovery phase. The febrile phase of the virus infection is characterized by sudden high-grade temperature accompanied by headache, vomiting, myalgia, arthralgias, and transient macular rash. I will show you again. See here, the temperature is suddenly raised up to 40. So it could be more than anything more than 38.5 degrees Celsius. And this febrile phase lasts for 3 to 7 days. So it lasts up to 3 to 7 days. And the headache, eye pain, and the joint pain occur in 60 to 70% of the cases. The rash approximately occurs in the half of the cases, and it is more common during primary infection than secondary infection. And when present, generally occurs 2 to 5 days after the onset of fever. And the typically macular or maculopapillary rash may occur over the face, thorax, abdomen, and extremities, and it may be associated with pruritus. So this is an important about rash because there are fever with rash is an important topic. After that, you will be seeing the dengue fever where there is a rash, and this is associated with pruritus. And the rash does not occur prior or along with the start of the fever. It generally occurs 2 to 5 days after the onset of the fever, and it is either macular or maculopapular rash, and it infects. It infects both face, thorax, abdomen, and the extremities. Here you can see the face, thorax. See, this is the rash here, and in between, you can be seeing normal areas. The remaining, all the red thing is rash. That is, it is called islands. So you can see all the redness here, and in between, this is the normal skin. So islands of rash. Between this is, these are called islands because on all the sides the rash is being involved, and very few uh, little area is normal. And this is the involvement of the lower limbs. Here you can see all rash. In between, it's normal. This white spots here, whatever you can see. In here also, these white spots wherever you can see, that is normal skin, and the remaining everything is the rash. The next is Here you can see the febrile phase, it lasting from starting at suddenly at 40 degrees and lasting up to 7 days. And earlier you will be seeing this dehydration, and the shock and bleeding will start around after the 3 days. And the rash will also be around the same time, the second or third day, and will be up to fifth to sixth to seventh days. And the hemorrhagic manifestations can also be observed in the febrile phase and mostly but are in the critical phase. So other less frequent manifestations include hematemesis, menorrhagia, melena, epistaxis, and the comorbid or pre-existing medical conditions such as peptic ulcer disease may increase the risk of hemorrhage. And the physical examination demonstrates conjunctival injection, pharyngeal erythema, lymphadenopathy, and hepatomegaly. And there is something called facial puffiness and petechiae on the skin or palate, and the bruising, particularly at the venipuncture sites, may be observed. And there is leukopenia and thrombocytopenia, that is less than 1 lakh cells are common. Increase in serum aspartate transaminase, and the elevation is 2 to 5 times the upper limit of the normal levels. But marked elevations could be 5 to 15 times the limit. And between 3 to 7 days of the illness, we should be watching for the signs of vascular leakage. So what does these include? These include vomiting, increasing abdominal pain, hepatomegaly, high or increasing hematocrit levels. So that is more than 20% from the baseline, with a concurrent rapid decrease in the platelet count and the development of pleural effusion, ascites, mucosal bleeding, lethargy, and the restlessness. See, this occurs between 3 to 7 days of the illness, as you can see in this chart here. It occurs between the 3 to 7 days of the illness, the shock and the bleeding and the organ impairment. What happens here is there is increase in the hematocrit more than 20% from the baseline, and the decreased platelet, that is less than 1 lakh, and it goes on decreasing. So these leads to warning signs. So we were speaking about the tourniquets. What exactly is a tourniquet? In the tourniquet, you will tie the BP cuff to the patient, and you inflate the cuff between the systolic and diastolic, the midway between the systolic and diastolic, for 5 minutes, and you take off the cuff. And the skin below the cuff is examined for petechiae. 1 or 2 minutes after deflating the cuff, there is presence of 10 or more new petechiae in 1 square inch area is considered positive test. So here you can see 10 or more petechiae in 1 square inch area, then you consider the tourniquet test to be positive. And there is a critical phase. In the critical phase, you would be seeing uh, around a difference that is typically between 3 to 7 days of infection. A small proportion of patients, that is, develop systemic vascular leak syndrome characterized by plasma leakage, bleeding, shock, and organ impairment. And this lasts up to 24 to 48 hours. So that is 1 to 2 days and sometimes 3 days in few people. Initially, there is adequate circulation that can be maintained by physiological compensation, resulting in pulse pressure narrowing. That is, systolic minus diastolic pressure is less than 20, then it is called pulse pressure being narrowed. The patient may appear well, and the systolic pressure may be normal or elevated. And there is nonetheless urgent careful resuscitation is needed. Once hypotension develops, systolic pressure falls rapidly, and irreversible shock may follow despite aggressive attempts of resuscitation. So that is why it's very important whenever you are treating a dengue patient, the hematocrit levels and the platelet level should be frequently checked, if possible twice a day. And the hematocrit, if it keeps on increasing, the patient should be adequately hydrated. And even after adequate hydration, if the patient's hematocrit is being increased, you should be suspecting for a plasma leakage, could be an internal bleeding, and the patient could be landing in shock. So prior to the development, you should be frequently checking the systolic pressure and the diastolic pressure and see for the pulse narrowing. If the pulse pressure is narrowing, immediate resuscitation measures should be taken forth. And in the critical phase, the imaging modalities for the detection of plasma leakage include ultrasonography and the chest radiography. And there is a right lateral decubitation. Chest radiography is also used for detection of pleural effusion. And the plasma leakage was detected by ultrasound as early as 3 days after the onset of fever. And the pleural effusions were observed more commonly than ascites. on the ultrasound, it is very easy to detect any fluid in the body. So even the mild fluid can also be easily detected on ultrasonography. So it is much more useful than the chest radiography for the detection of the fluid. And the moderate to severe thrombocytopenia is common during the critical phase. That is, platelet count of less than 20,000 can also be observed, followed by rapid improvement during the recovery phase. So whenever the platelet count is going less than 20,000, it just suggests it is a severe thrombocytopenia. But if the symptoms and signs other than these are getting better, then patient can be we can wait and the recovery phase will start. And the transient increase in activated partial thromboblast in time and decrease in the fibrinogen levels are also common. And the reversion of the critical phase of the altered vascular permeability corresponds with the rapid improvement in the symptoms. As I was saying, once there is a rapid improvement in the symptoms, and though the platelet count is less than 20,000, we can wait for the treatment, the platelet transfusion and all, because there is a rapid improvement during the recovery phase. So, dengue hemodynamic assessment, there is a stable circulation at first, there is a shock, that is dengue hemorrhagic fever grade 3, and there is a prolonged or profound shock, that is dengue hemorrhagic fever grade 4. So, the heart rate is in the stable circulation, everything is normal. That's a normal patient. The heart rate keeps on increasing in the both, is a shock, and the blood pressure. There is a normal systolic blood pressure in the dengue hemorrhagic, that is shock in the grade 3, and but the narrowing of the pulse pressure, and this is where the you should be doing the aggressive resuscitation methods. But in prolonged or profound shock, there is severe hypotension and undetectable blood pressure. And the respiratory rate is there is tachypnea, and in prolonged, it leads to hyperpnea and Kussmaul's respiration. The urine output, as this blood pressure is decreasing, you will see the urine output being decreased in any case. And once there is severe hypotension, there won't be any urine output, that leads to anuria also. And the conscious levels also correspond to the blood pressure. And once the blood pressure keeps on decreasing, the conscious levels may go down. And the capillary refill, it normally takes less than 2 seconds for the capillary to be refilled, but it's prolonged in the dengue hemorrhagic fever grade 3, that's in shock, or in the profound shock, it's very much prolonged. And the extremities are cool due to hypotension, and there is completely mottled skin in the profound shock. And the peripheral pulse volume. The peripheral pulse volume is weak and steady in the shock, and the profound shock you will be seeing feeble or absent. So these are the few things that you should be checking when the patient of the dengue hemorrhagic fever is seen and is say there is no improvement in the symptoms. You should be checking all these and you should be categorizing him, and then the treatment as per the categorization. So there is, as I was saying here, the dengue hemorrhagic fever grade 3, grade 4. We'll just discuss about all the four grades. The severity of dengue hemorrhagic fever. In the grade 1, there is fever, hemorrhagic manifestations, that is positive tourniquetus and the evidence of plasma leakage. And the grade 2 is all these of the grade 1 along with plus spontaneous bleeding. And of the grade 3, there is either with grade 1 or grade 2 plus narrowing of the pulse pressure and hypotension. And the grade 4, all of the three plus profound shock with undetectable blood pressure and pulse. So it's nothing but similar to this slide. All these present, whenever all these are present, it comes under the grade 4, and all these present are grade 3. And the grade 1 and the grade 1 and grade 2 are, the grade 1 is fever and hemorrhagic manifestations with evidence of plasma leakage, and the grade 2 is all these along with the spontaneous bleed. So these are the four grades are categorized, and the dengue shock syndrome consists of dengue hemorrhagic fever grade 3 and dengue hemorrhagic fever grade 4. And then this convulsion phase. During the convulsion phase, the plasma leakage and hemorrhage resolve, and the vital signs stabilize, and the accumulated fluids are reabsorbed. And the additional rash at confluent erythematous eruption of with small islands of unaffected skin, that is often pruritic, may appear during the convulsion phase. So whenever there is a rash being occurred and the clinical symptoms are slowly getting better, then you can be saying the patient is entered into the convulsion phase. Most commonly, the rash appears in the convulsion phase only, and within 1 or 2 days difference lasting to 1 to 5 days, this rash. So here you can see erythematous eruption with small islands of unaffected skin that is often pruritic. And the recovery phase typically lasts 2 to 4 days, and adults may have profound fatigue for days to weeks after the recovery. This is something you should advise, tell the patient that you will be having the weakness and fatigue for few weeks, sometimes few months also for few patients, and they should not be worrying about that. And the additional manifestations when liver failure during described following resuscitation from profound shock, in many cases it may caused by prolonged hypoperfusion or hypoxia rather than direct viral effect. So, as we've seen previously, the viral genome can directly affect the hepatocyte cell death and Kappa cell death. The profound shock can also lead to liver failure. And in additionally, abdominal pain, that is normally mimicking acute abdomen, has been described as clinical manifestation in case series. And there is an acute kidney injury reported up to 3% of the dengue cases. And the mechanism of this AK includes shock, rhabdomyolysis, glomerulonephritis, and acute tubular necrosis. And retinal vasculitis and hemophagocytic lymphohistiocytosis has been also described. So, of this, the important point is the AK includes glomerulonephritis and acute tubular necrosis, and it is mostly acute kidney injury and which is reversible. And the neurological manifestation, these includes encephalopathy and seizures. The permanent neurological sequelae has been described. And that is the most dreaded one. The permanent neurological sequelae has been described, and the frequency of these manifestations is very less, that is only 1%. And these clinical manifestations include fever, headache, and lethargy. And other syndromes have also been reported to potentially associated with dengue virus infection include stroke, Guillain-Barré syndrome, transverse myelitis, pure motor weakness, and mononeuropathies and polyneuropathies. So of this, the important one is to be remembered is the stroke, the Guillain-Barré syndrome, and the transverse myelitis. It's very less, but there are uh, the percentages where the manifestations where the people have been affected and led to stroke and Guillain-Barré syndrome and transverse myelitis, though the percentage is very less. But there is a chance of permanent neurological sequelae as described, and it includes encephalopathy and seizures may be seen. And the cardiovascular manifestations include myocardial impairment, arrhythmias, and occasionally fulminant myocarditis. So that is the important one. There could be myocardial impairment, arrhythmias, but very less fulminant myocarditis. So the diagnosis of infection should be suspected in the febrile individuals with typical manifestations, as we've seen, and relevant epidemiological exposure. That is the travel to within the 2 weeks to an endemic area or within a mosquito-borne transmission virus infection. The provisional diagnosis of dengue virus infection is usually established clinically. So that is important point here. The provisional diagnosis of any dengue virus infection is usually established clinically. And in the regions and seasons with high incidence of dengue virus infection, the positive predictive value of clinical criteria is high, particularly for illness meeting all the criteria of dengue hemorrhagic fever. So there are so many endemic areas in Telangana also between there in the Karimnagar and Adilabad regions. They are more endemic, and there you will be seeing high percentage of cases with dengue virus in these months, mostly between the August and the November months. There the diagnosis, the provisional diagnosis is always established clinically, and depending upon the clinical criteria as we were discussing previously, with warning signs and without warning signs. So the clinical criteria for diagnosis of dengue fever as per the government and Indian national guidelines, an acute febrile illness of 2 to 7 days duration with two or more of the following, that is the headache, retroorbital pain, myalgia, arthralgia, rash, and hemorrhagic manifestations. And the dengue hemorrhagic fever, a case with clinical criteria of dengue fever plus a positive tourniquet test, petechiae, or bleeding from mucosa, gastrointestinal tract, or injection sites, and with thrombocytopenia of less than 10,000, and the evidence of plasma leakage, that is hematocrit per age and is more than 20%. A more than 20% drop in the hematocrit following the volume replacement and the signs of plasma leakage. So, For the only for dengue fever, these should be fine. For the dengue hemorrhagic fever, these four, that is clinical criteria of dengue fever, these things, along with the hemorrhagic tendencies, that is positive tourniquetus, petechiae, and bleeding from the mucosa, and thrombocytopenia, and evidence of plasma leakage. And the evidence of plasma leakage we can get by hematocrit value. That is more than 20% drop in the hematocrit value following the replacement treatment compared to baseline, or increase of more than 20% from the baseline even after the treatment. And the dengue shock syndrome, all above criteria of dengue hemorrhagic fever with evidence of circulatory failure manifested by rapid and weak pulse, narrow pulse pressure, or hypotension for age, cold and clammy skin, and restlessness. So this is what dengue shock syndrome has been categorized as. So the three clinical features of dengue fever, 2 to 7 days, with two or more of the following you can be seeing as dengue fever. And if there is presence of all these four, then it has dengue hemorrhagic fever. And when there is presence of circulatory failure manifested by rapid and weak pulse and narrow pulse pressure and hypotension, then we will categorize under dengue shock syndrome. And there is something called probable dengue fever, dengue hemorrhagic fever, where there is non-ELISA based NS1 antigen IgM positive, along with the clinical description of dengue fever during the outbreak. And there's a confirmed dengue fever where the isolation of dengue virus has been done, demonstration of IgM antibody titer by ELISA test, the demonstration of dengue virus antigens in serum sample by NS1 ELISA, and IgG seroconversion paired after 2 weeks with fourfold increase in IgG titer, and the detection of viral nucleic acid in the polymerase chain reaction. So either dengue virus has been isolated, positive IgM antibodies by ELISA, or there is positive NS1 ELISA virus antigen, or there is a positive IgG titer which is fourfold increase after the 2 weeks, and there is a detection of viral nucleic acid. So this is a confirmed dengue along with the fever and all. Then you will be seeing it as confirmed dengue, and where there is this thing, there is a probable dengue fever or dengue hemorrhagic fever. The laboratory diagnosis, as we were saying, these were the laboratory diagnosis for the diagnosis and the confirmation. In the first week of illness, you will be seeing this RT-PCR to be done, the reverse transcriptase polymerase chain reaction, for the detection of viral nucleic acid, and the NS1 antigen to be detected. That is viral antigen, non-structural protein NS1, typically positive during the first 7 days of illness. In primary infection, the sensitivity of NS1 detection can exceed up to 90%. But whereas in the secondary infection, it is very low. So for the nucleic acid, we'll be doing RT-PCR and detection of viral antigen non-structural NS1 protein, and it has 90% sensitivity in the primary infection. So the direct methods: virus isolation, genome detection, and antigen detection. Whereas this has specificity, more specificity, or whereas presence of serology of IgM and IgG antibodies, which is easy to do, but the specificity slowly decreases. As we are seeking the IgM and IgG immunoglobulins, the IgM is a single specimen obtained from patient with clinical syndrome consistent with dengue, and the diagnosis may be confirmed by IgM seroconversion between paired acute and convalescent phase. And the diagnosis of acute dengue virus infection may be established by fourfold or greater rise in the antibody titer. So, most importantly, the important point is the presence of IgM antibodies should be seen. In the IgG, it is primary dengue infection is characterized by slow and low titer antibody response, and it is detected low titer in the beginning of 7 days, and there's a rapid increase of antibody titer beginning 4 days after the onset of illness with broad cross reactivity in the secondary dengue. Whereas in the primary dengue, there is very low in the first 7 days and it increases slowly. Whereas in the secondary dengue, within the first 4 days of onset of illness, there is a broad cross reactivity leading to increased IgG levels. Here you can see the IgG levels and the IgM levels in the primary infection. In the secondary infection, the IgG levels just shoot up, whereas IgM levels are more in the primary infection. So, this skip this. So the differential diagnosis. The differential diagnosis include malaria, enteric fever, pharyngitis, tonsillitis, and the chikungunya, because all these present with the same fever and the body pains and febrile with chills and rigor. So these are the four most important that we'll be seeing: malaria, enteric fever, chikungunya, and the pharyngitis. And the remaining also can the Ebola, hemorrhagic fever, and all can also be included in the differential diagnosis. So how do you want to manage? So this is an important point. There is important table. So when there's a dengue viral infection and the patient is symptomatic, then asymptomatic, it's fine. There is no nothing to treat. But when there's symptomatic, there is a mild dengue, moderate dengue, and severe dengue. In the mild dengue syndrome, we'll be seeing undifferentiated dengue fever, fever without complications, and without any evidence of capillary leakage. That is mild dengue. Then you can be giving a home management with good fluid resuscitation and all hydration. But when there is a dengue fever, is high risk of comorbidities, or there is a dengue fever with warning signs and symptoms, or dengue hemorrhagic fever of grade 1 and grade 2 with minor bleeding, then the patient should be closely monitored and possibly hospitalization should be required. And when there is severe dengue, that is dengue hemorrhagic fever 3 or 4, and there is organ involvement and severe metabolic acidosis along with significant hemorrhage, there is a tertiary level care should be given. So as we discussed previously, the mild, moderate, and dengue with dengue hemorrhagic fever 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, then we can categorize the treatments. So the management mostly involves paracetamol is the preferred drug for the treatment of the febrile illness, and the bed rest, tepid sponging to keep the temperature below 38.5 degrees Celsius should be done. But the avoid of aspirin and NSAID should be done because it leads to platelet dysfunction and severe bleeding. So that is more important rather than vomiting, gastritis, and acidosis. This aspirin and NSAIDs will lead to platelet dysfunction. As there is already a platelet dysfunction in the and platelet destruction in the dengue, aspirin and NSAIDs are strictly contraindicated because it may lead to severe bleeding. And then only paracetamol should be given. And the oral fluid replacement has to be provided judiciously, as there is constant loss in either form of sweating or in the form of vomiting. And the fruit juices are preferred to water. ORS and fruit juices are preferred to water. And the close monitor of initial signs of shock should be done. The critical period is usually around third day during the transition from febrile to afebrile phase. And the serial hematocrit determinations are recommended as they indicate degree of plasma leak and also lead to use of intravenous fluids. So the criteria for admission, as we were speaking, the severe, moderate, mild, moderate, and severe, we will categorize the patient and then we will lead to admission. And the management is mostly this under the observation of signs and shock. The management mostly involves first you should be ruled out with the hematoconcentration, the symptoms such as abdominal pain, the starry stools, and the gums manifestation. The spontaneous bleeding should be hospitalized, and oral rehydration and antipyretics and tepid sponging is the primary mode of treatment. And despite the treatment, if patient develops shock, then the protocol for the treatment is dengue hemorrhagic fever 3 and 4 should be initiated. Here you can see the hemorrhagic tendencies and thrombocytopenia seen. Check the hematocrit. First, initiate IV therapy, that is 6 ml per kg per hour, crystalloid solution for 1 to 2 hours. And then there is improvement. You can make it the half dose and slowly decrease once there is improvement as from 2 to 4 hours. And when there is a further improvement, discontinue after 24 to 48 hours. But if the hematocrit rises, and increase the IV from 10 ml per kg crystalloid solution for 2 hours and check the hematocrit again and again come here. But if the hematocrit keeps on falling, suspect internal hemorrhage and the blood transfusion at 10 ml per kg whole body or 5 ml per kg packed RBC should be given. And if there is an improvement, then IV therapy by crystalloid successfully reducing the flow from 10 to 6 and later to 3. As we are speaking here, same as here. But you will be starting at 10 here, 10 ml per kg per hour, and discontinue after 24 to 48 hours. So on a whole, the summary is you will be starting a crystalloid solution at 6 ml per kg per hour and making it half dose as the patient keeps on improving. And if the patient doesn't improve, then suspect an internal hemorrhage, and the blood transfusion should be done, and then there will be improvement, and then slowly decrease the crystalloid solution as the improvement is going on. So the management of dengue hemorrhagic fever grade 3 and grade 4 as the same, along with, as we were discussing previously, is the same, and along with that you can be giving fluid should be changed to colloid solution, preferably dextran 40. This is what you should be given, and the blood transfusion should be done. Here you can see now in this there is a compensated shock, that is pulse pressure is more than 20 and hypotension more than 90 and hematocrit of more than 20%. And here there are two things here. We'll discuss this two and we'll finish it off. Yeah. So there is an improvement of the vascular shock. Then 5 minutes. The improvement of the vascular shock. You start IV therapy of crystalloid solution as we were discussing previously, but at 10 ml per kg per hour, and discontinue after 24 hours, slowly tapering it off. But if there is no improvement, even after starting an initial IV therapy at 10 to 20 ml per kg per hour, and the hematocrit keeps on rising, the IV crystalloid solution should be given, and it should be maintained at the same. Even then, if there is no improvement, then it should be due to bleeding. So the hematocrit may rise even after the giving of the solution, or the hematocrit suddenly falls. Then also both the conditions, it should be bleeding, and you should be giving blood transfusion, and after the blood transfusion there should be improvement. And if there is no improvement, then the refractory hypotension, then you will be starting inotropes with crystalloid maintenance fluid according to Holliday-Seeger formula. So the summary is you will be starting fluids, and the fluids at very 10 to 20 ml per kg per hour in a compensated shock patient, and there will be improvement. Then you will be slowly tapering, and if there is no improvement, you will be maintaining the same and along with blood transfusion, and there is sudden fall of hematocrit that leads to suspected of bleeding. And even then, if there is no improvement, then there is a refractory hypotension, then you would be starting the IV inotropes and crystalloid for the maintenance of the Holliday-Seeger formula. Here you can see the signs. Immediate rapid volume replacement given at 10 to there is improvement of the hematocrit more than 20% from the baseline, and the systolic blood pressure is less than 90. That is, the shock is not being compensated yet. So here the same thing, you will be starting with the fluids and the improvement of the fluids as it goes on. And if the hematocrit keeps on rising, then you will be still maintaining the fluids and the check for the hematocrit. And if there is suspected bleeding, you will be doing blood transfusion, refractory hypotension, and look for the inotropes and start. So the treatment is mostly same. It's just the amount of the fluid you will be given. Here you will be giving a rapid bolus for 10 to 15 to 30 minutes, which is not being seen in the compensated shock or the other one. This one here, in any one, the fluids are the mainstay of the treatment. You'll be starting at 6 ml per hour in only dengue fever. When there is a compensated shock at 10 to 20 ml, and there is no compensation of the shock, you will be starting at 10 to 20 ml per kg, and with a rapid bolus over 15 to 30 minutes. And if there is no improvement, you will be checking for hematocrit, and if it keeps on falling, then it's definitive a bleeding, and you will be giving that is due to refractory, and you will be giving blood transfusion, and there is an improvement. Even then, if there is no improvement, there is refractory hypotension, and you should be starting on inotropes and the crystalloid maintenance. So that is, and the indication of platelet transfusion, this is the one point I'll say and finish it off. The platelet transfusion can be left up to as less as 10,000 cubic millimeter, and when in the absence of bleeding manifestations. But when there is a bleeding manifestations, even if the platelet count is high, you would be transferring the platelets. The platelets can be random donor platelets, Buffy coded platelets, or single donor or apheretic platelets. So these are the points you should be remembering. And the management of severe bleeding, as we have spoken previously, that is how the blood transfusion and all. And the criteria for the discharge of patient. This one point you can remember: platelet count less than 10,000 cubic millimeter. In the absence of bleeding manifestations, you can wait, or hemorrhage with or without thrombocytopenia. then you should be giving. And the types is random donor platelets, single donor platelets, and apheretic platelets. And the criteria for discharge is patient has no fever for 24 hours, there is adequate urine output, there is normal blood pressure, no respiratory distress, and the persistent platelet count of more than 50,000. That is when the patient is fulfilling all this. That is when you can discharge him. So, for the severe bleeding, as we have seen, blood transfusion is the one we would be doing. Here you can see suspected bleeding, blood transfusion is the one we would be doing. And even then, there is a refractory hypotension. Then you would be checking for the refractory hypotension, and there is no improvements, both in compensated shock and the shock which is not compensated. You will be starting IV inotropes with crystalloid maintenance. So I think this is more than enough. I've just crossed your time. I'll finish up here. Thank you so much. You can just go through this slides. I think this you will get this all the class as a PPT. So you just go through these treatment slides and make them screenshots and keep with you, or write down in the notes. That would be useful for you, both while for giving the exams and also while giving the treatment in the future. Thank you.